We alive. Okay, so today I'm going to try and build a building. So I took this building here. Wow, this one here. Specifically this one. And I think I figured out why the culling is having problems. Um, look how many, how many, how many, look at this. You see the numbers and how they're overlaid? It's because there's multiples. There's frickin' multiples. There's multiple points there. It means that this here is not actually connected. Oops. We want. Oops. Um, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So if I go like this in transform, and I pull them out, look at that. Yeah. See? Or if I go like this in transform, what's this one pull? Okay. Yeah. Look at that. When something isn't welded together, it means that this entire thing has microscopic holes. And when each one of the windows is like that, you start running into the problem that it could cause problems of this. Like we could shoot a ray in between these potentially. And because of that, I think that could cause problems. Ideally, you want these things to be entirely, based off of singular numbers effectively. Hmm. Projects? Back? Wait, can I open this? So this is what I started on yesterday. We're going to try and finish this today. So we can have a total number. There's a finite number of pieces that we can have. When I say pieces, I mean squares or rectangles, right? So first things first, let's go to trim. Fuck, we need to open up a. Is it this one? No, this is the entire building. Whatever, that's fine. There, and then if we try and load in a trim sheet, it's going to complain because we can only have 200 uniform areas. Obviously, we have more than 200. So, let's finish this. The idea here is that we have the areas that we care about, and the areas are singular colors. So what we're going to do, we're going to come in here and we're going to take this color here. That's not the right color. What the? Oh, cool. Cool. Oh, for fuck's sakes. Hmm. I have to restart my computer apparently. Do 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 do. Wow, he's doing a really good job. Josie for the win. Yeah, his sculpting skills are getting much better. Hmm. There we go. Oh, let's take it. Free for now. Might as well. Oh, I want to sign in right now. Here we go. There we go. Do 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 do. Here we go. I don't. Oh, wait. Come on. There we go. I wish there was a way to recenter this. Because right now it's like, I don't think it's quite perfect. It's not. Yeah. That's what I thought. Okay. So what I need to do now is effectively I need to draw a line here, and then I can fill this and then this. And then I'll have the ability to start in on my my thing. That isn't that beautiful? Mm, mm. There is something that I would like to do. So I think we're going to do that first. Which is, if I'm not mistaken, it's like the last three. The last two or the last three? The last two. Okay. So the last two. So we're just gonna do two. We'll do these ones here. We'll leave these as they are. Let's section these ones out here. We just want these ones. many do I have? Oh, one more. That's all I need. One more. Okay, so now if I go like that, look at that. Beautiful. Now, if I do GG there, then I come down here, I do that. Here we go. And the nice thing is that I can go in and I can make changes to this as we go. And I've got the got the ability to do that. Where's Rhythm? So, look at that. Do you know what's nice about this? Wait. That has dots on it? Wait. There's inconsistencies. Apparently down here there's inconsistencies. Oh, I see them. I see them. Look at that. Do you see them? I see them. I used to be able to move in here and now I can't for some reason.
Hello, this is John Dickinson for Ryzen Lab, and in this tutorial we're going to take a look at the fundamental workflow for unwrapping any object inside Ryzen UV. So we'll start by loading our first object into the Ryzen UV interface, and this is going to be a cube. So come up to the File menu and choose Load, and we're choosing Load because this object hasn't had the UVs unwrapped yet. So just navigate to where you save the work files, and inside the Models folder you'll find a file called cube.fbx, so double click that, and that loads it into the interface. Now we have the 3D view over here and the 2D view here, and I just want to talk about keyboard shortcuts before we go any further. If you come up to the Edit menu and choose Keyboard Mouse Customizer, over here are the mouse interaction shortcuts, and over here are the keyboard. And I'm using the built-in keyboard shortcuts, so if you're not, just click Revert Built-in, if you want to that is, just so you're using the same shortcuts as me. For mouse interactions, I'm actually using the C4D mouse preset. You can click here and choose which one you prefer. I prefer C4D because I was used to using the C4D shortcuts when I was actually a C4D user, and I'm using Blender now, but currently the Blender shortcuts still have select as right mouse button, which is really foreign to me, so I prefer C4D. So choose the one you want, and make sure you've saved and closed. And in the interface, if you just come over to the right-hand side and just come down to the bottom here, you'll see a handy list of mouse interaction shortcuts that you can refer to. And I'm going to use these top three right now: Orbit, Zoom, and Pan. So I'm just going to just zoom out a little bit and hold down the Alt key to orbit around this and middle mouse button. So these are really important keyboard shortcuts because you're going to need to set scenes on your 3D. Hold down the Alt key to orbit around this and middle mouse button. So these are really important keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah, okay. Oh, now it's working. Weird. Okay. Okay, so I've got two in the top corner there. Scale this down. Oh, I see you. What if I go for a really bright red for now? G, G. I don't see it. Feel like this one doesn't exist. I feel crazy and I don't see it. That does not mean that it's not there. This one here isn't showing up at all. Is it? Yeah, no. This one doesn't show up at all. Okay. So what's that one? That one's this one here. Oh, it's probably because it's like the same color as something else. How? How do I have these? Okay, so at least it's that one specifically that's the problem. Although I still don't understand how it has any. Okay, so they're towards the bottom there. What if I do a TIFF instead? I think this will load a TIFF, right? Yeah, maybe a TIFF will be better. Nope. Okay, let's export it as a PNG then. Ah, I had my hopes and dreams, and they have been shattered. Perfect. That's what we want to see. There we go. Okay, so now what we can do is we can take this, we go like this, and we cut. Beautiful. Now we need to bring in the texture.
Arrived with Ryzen UV 2024. Okay, so before we start looking at trim sheet tools in Ryzen UV, we should probably discuss very, very quickly what a trim sheet actually is. Here on screen, you're looking at an example of a trim sheet material, and this material describes this object. Every part of this object's materials is within this. So a trim sheet is a way of combining multiple elements into a single texture. They tile in one direction, either in the vertical or horizontal, or sections of it may tile and other sections don't, as in this case. This is known as a hybrid trim sheet. They're reusable on multiple assets, and they are highly efficient in game engines, because instead of having multiple materials on one object, you can have one material applied to many objects. Here is another example of an asset that's utilised a trim sheet to texture it, and you can see that all of this detail are outlined in a single trim sheet. So down the bottom here, you can see this detail is there.
This trim sheet looks like two trim sheets stacked on top of each other, if I'm being completely honest. Doesn't look like a single trim sheet. It looks like two.
Is this here? All of this trim around the edge here, are these arrows, and you can see that this entire thing tiles horizontally, apart from these segments here, which are used for specific parts of the model. This is also a hybrid trim sheet. And here we have another example. The front face of this building is completely described by this trim sheet texture. So now we know what a trim sheet is. Let's move on over to Ryzen UV and look at our trim sheet tools. But before I do, a big thank you to Jason and Hamish for allowing us to showcase their ArtStation pages. Okay, so here we are in Ryzen UV. I've got an object loaded, this simple cuboid, and its UV islands are outside of the UV space. I want to keep things really simple so it's crystal clear what's going on. So the trim sheet tools. So we've got this new flyout panel at the top here. And when you first open it, it will be displaying the group's outliner. And to get to the trim sheets, you can see these tabs at the top here. So click on trim sheet, and it'll open up the trim sheet tools. Just a quick note, you do need to be in island mode. So if you are in edge mode, it will display please switch to island mode. So let's talk about each section briefly. At the top here, we've got the trim sheet outliner. This is representative of the tile, and your trims will be listed underneath. We'll get onto that in a minute. Next, we have the manage section.
They do this. Sorry.
Then hotspot. And right at the bottom, we've got this display. This will be closed by default, but you can open it up. Okay, so before we start delving into the trim sheet tools, I just want to have a quick look at a trim sheet texture. You'll notice this example is non-square, and Ryzen UV actually supports this kind of ratio, and we'll talk about that later. But you'll notice that this texture has different sections for different texture elements. Now, we could just import a model and this texture into Ryzen UV, cut the seams, unfold and pack the model, then manually place the islands where they need to go on this trim sheet. But this would be incredibly slow, particularly for a complex model with lots of UV islands, and that's where Ryzen UV's trim sheet tools come in. So back in Ryzen UV, we're going to start with the Manage section, and we're going to start with the Create button. So let's hit that. This will create an area called Trim. These are a way of dividing your trim sheet texture into sections in Ryzen UV. Islands can then populate these areas, and even be linked to specific trims. You'll notice that the trim outliner is now populated with this trim underneath the tile. Trims can be selected by clicking the label. You can also use drag select, or by highlighting in the outliner. You can resize trims by using the corner handles, or the side handles. And they can be moved by clicking and dragging the label. Moving on to the next button, you can see it's grayed out here, and that's because these buttons that are grayed out need a trim selected. So let's select the trim. The next button's rename, pretty self-explanatory. You can give this any custom name you like, so let's just call this Ryzen UV. And then you can see that the label has changed on the trim itself, and the name has changed in the outliner. I'm going to Control-Z that. The next button is delete trim, so you need the trim selected, and delete, and it'll just delete it. So let's Control-Z that. The next button in our Manage panel is Colors, and if I hit this, you'll see that the Color ID map gets opened at the bottom here. So with the trim selected, you can select any of these swatches. So if I select this, it will change the color of the trim, and you can even pick a custom color. So let's do this, apply, and then hit the tick. Oh, I didn't have a trim selected. And then it changes the color. I'm going to change this back to distortion, as it originally was. The next button is Select All. This will just select all trims. And after that, we have Deselect All, which deselects all trims. It's important to note this only includes trims. So if I have a trim selected, and I had a bunch of islands selected, and press Deselect All, only the trim would be deselected. So moving on to these bottom three buttons here, I'm actually going to deal with these backwards. But before I do that, I'm going to create another trim area. So let's just move this here and do something like this. Create another trim. Put this down the bottom here. Make something like that. So let's start with Export. If I hit the Export button, this will allow me to export my trim sheets as an SVG, a scalable vector graphic. So I'm just going to overwrite this trim layout that I've already got here and hit Save. Now this has been saved to an SVG. The advantage of this is if you use the same trim layout for your textures repeatedly, you can reuse this file instead of creating your trims over and over again. So now I'm going to jump over to Load. And I'm not going to load the same trim layout because it's already in existence here. So let's load something I prepared earlier. It's another SVG, so trim layout 2. You can see that you can reload your trims. You'll also notice that loading a trim guide image like this will completely overwrite any trims that are already present. So the trim areas that I created at the bottom here are completely gone now and have been overwritten by these new trims. And that brings me on to Merge. So if we go to the Merge button, unlike Load, when we hit this and I load the first trim layout that I saved, the trims that were already present remain. So these have been merged together. Okay, we're back and I've cleared all the trims from our UV space. And that's because I wanted to talk about creating and editing SVGs in an external program. So I'm going to open up Illustrator. And you can see that I've loaded the trims that we exported earlier. Now, if I select one of these and resize it like this, and then save, I can now reload this in Ryzen UV. So you can actually create your trim areas in an external program like Illustrator to create SVGs that Ryzen UV will just read.
Totally.
Going back to load briefly, it's not just SVGs that can be utilized to determine trim areas. We can also use color images. So here's an image I prepared in Photoshop earlier, and it's just color in different areas. This is a PNG. So let's go to load. I'm going to load the trim mask. And you can see that our trim areas are now being defined by this color image. One thing should be noted about color images, if we go to load, let's talk about the supported file formats. Here we can see SVG, which is obviously a vector graphics, but then we've got PNG, bitmap, and TJ. And this is because they're non-lossy formats. We don't support JPEG because of the amount of compression, and this would actually confuse how Ryzen UV interprets the areas. So just keep that in mind. Okay, I've cleared out those trims and I've got a single one on screen again, and we're going to deal with the last button in our Manage panel, which is Lock Trim Shapes. When I hit this button, you'll notice that the handles have now been hidden and the trim cannot be reshaped, and it also prevents the selection via the rectangle selection tool. So let's turn that off. Okay, so I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to deal with, and I want to talk briefly about trim association. So I'm going to grab this island and actually move it inside this trim. As you can see, this island has now adopted the colour of the trim on its outline, and this is evident in the 3D view as well. It's also reflected in the trim outliner. So here you'll see trim 0, and next to it, you've got this little bracket and it says 1.
Is it this one? Oh, here it is. Beautiful. Dope. Okay, wait. Wait, what were we doing? Okay, there we go. All right.
1i, which is meaning that it contains one island. So if I grab another island and place this in there, you'll see that it's now associated, it's got the same colour as the trim, and up in the outliner, it now says 2i. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about before moving on to the hotspotting is the display. Let's go through each of these.
So why does this not just always show? Can I see this? Okay, so which one is this that I wanted? Is it this one? No, it was this one that we wanted right here. Now I just want this to fill, right?
These little buttons here. So the first button is simply hide and show trim label. So see a trim label here, and if we toggle this on and off, it will hide that. Shape this, and it can still. Let's turn next how transparent the trim is. So happy to grid, point, margin, trim, file there. So let's do this. I'm going to grab this corner and move it, and as you can see this massively more effectively. Well, this can actually be done in the Island with a clear trim zones. Okay, even though Ryzen UV has tools for automatic placement and fitting of islands in trims, first I want to make it clear that a more manual approach is also possible. So on screen, I have a trim layout and some islands, and as we discussed before, you can associate an island with a trim by simply moving it into it. But now we've done that, how do we fit this island into the trim more effectively? Well, this can actually be done in the transform tools. So if I press this here, we get all our transform tools, and I'm interested in this fit and align. So I'm going to lock this section and move back to my select tool, and we're going to concentrate on this here. First, we need to know what we're fitting and aligning to. So if we look at match 2 here at the top, we can see it's currently set to grid. Now we want to set this to trim, because this is what we're going to fit and align to. This is our reference point.
Trim.
Point. So I'm going to select my island here in this trim, and I'm going to start at the bottom actually with a line. Now that our island's selected, we can actually make a choice here about how this island is aligned within this trim. If I move this like this, we can also align it horizontally. If I undo that, we can also align it like this. I'm just going to put it in the center. We also have options for how this island is fit. So if I look at the top here under fit, we can fit this to the extremities of the.
There we go. Then this one here. Wait, wasn't this supposed to be... Wasn't this supposed to have a bunch of different colors? Right, I fucked it up. We were supposed to have extra colors there. Export Tega. Trim sheet. Layout. Beautiful. Look at that. Then I can take this one and I can move it down here or move it over here or here or here or here. Let's figure out exactly which one we wanted. I think this one is the correct one here. There. Now we've got these ones and we can actually do a trim sheet based off of like actual colors that we care about. Hmm. It's a gradient. Oh, I see why it's a gradient. Damn. Glass causes problems. Hmm. Maybe the idea might have to be to lock it down into a different system for glass. Glass might need to be its own thing just to keep with the yeah. Glass is probably gonna have to be its own thing altogether. Damn. I had hopes. I had dreams. I tells you dreams. All right. Well, this is what we're learning. This is the one that we just did, right? No, wait. Which one did we just do? Which one are we working on right now? Actually, it doesn't really matter all that much. Actually, no, it does because, let's try it with a single color for now. We're just going to try it with the singular color. I think this has a color that this blue could work. So we'll leave it. Yeah, we'll try this. We'll try this. Right? Small window. I want to say it was this one, right? No. This one. Yeah, there we go. And then this one here would be T7. Beautiful. Now we come into here. We do meshes, create folder. Environment. That's not quite what I was thinking that was going to happen, but you know. Okay, so then we go to material. We do create a new material. And we go stylized lit. Wait. That has two materials on it. That's not correct. Hmm. Detail map. Why is it white? It's not supposed to be white. It shouldn't be white. It should be like actually there.
Have you ever wanted a spoon?
Working down. Maybe utilizing maybe the flat one might be the way to go. Feel really off today. Been feeling off lately as a whole, right? Oh, this is the installation guide. I wish they had a quick start guide. That was like a video. In Unity, go to Windows. With the README script tool, one of the jobs is to automatically configure UPR to work with Quibbly. What's up, Fox? My lawn looks awesome. Actually wish my immediate neighbor cared more. Looks like a savanna. You'd probably hate having me as a neighbor then. We had an infestation, ate a corner out of our yard. All better now. Infestation of what, though? Oh, that's possible. Having trouble with Unity 6. I just today I'm trying to get a wall to trying to get this wall working. It's very white. I'm assuming if I change this, Yeah, this changes the so this is all one color at this point. But if I just want the actual thing to show up, it won't. You're considering treating yourself? Treating yourself to what? Tweet yourself. Compound pass. I don't even know what this is. This? This is a transformer, right? Do you have to put this together like a Gundam? I should really pull out my Gundam and do my Gundam at some point. The parts are large. Okay, so it's not quite the same. Unity rendering. Unity engine dot rendering dot unity. Universal post processing. Underpass in the record render. Implement this method to integrate the rendering pass into the URP render graph or enable compatibility mode. Lopi, thanks for the raid, man. How was the rest of your stream? How did it go? You want to share images? They made the beat additional transformers. Interesting. So how many transformers is this thing made out of? Do 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 do. Wow. Went well. Still lots of things need to be done, but good progress. Nice. Pre-daking is 8. Interesting. As in Predator Beast? Beast? Oh, okay. I don't know anything about Transformers, dude. I know so little about Transformers. I also know very little about Gundam and anything to do with mechs, to be honest. I know next to nothing. Oh yeah, so I was thinking about seeing if I could get into voice work. The one on Prime, right? So that's the new one, right? I'm kind of disappointed with the Witch of Mercury. I wanted a second season. No, I didn't really care about that, but I wanted a second season. I'm seeing you for the first time? What? Nah. Isn't is the new one has a female pilot as well, right? Like it centers around a female pilot. Oh, well, this is my face. This is the game I'm working on. I'll show you the world that I have so far. But first things first, let's take a look at some of the actual scenes that I've got working. Right. So if we go to this one, we'll save. Come over to here. I think that render issue should go away. So this is the game right now. Whee! Poor anime waifus. What? Nah. Yeah. And then I do have a version of this in an actual city. The city takes a little bit to load though. And I don't have actual walking characters in this city yet. Because I've got to build the city a bit more. It just looks it's really hard to work within this city right now. And I want to make some changes. So, but in the meantime, this will load in. Oh, grow back? Yeah, pretty much. Oh, this is the wrong city. I can do this city though. This city actually performs okay on my system. This one does not perform on my friend's computer, and I think it's a draw call issue. So I'm trying to lower the draw call count and do proper batching and stuff like that to get it to work correctly. So I think we're in the 20 to 30,000 draw calls, which is really bad. I think our budget we cap out around 1,000, or no, it's like 2,000. Wait, what's going on here? Is this like full on broken? I like the general look of this city, but I don't like the performance of this city. It's really bad. The performance of the city's horrible. To be fair, it's also like, everything has like fucking 6 or 7 different materials attached to it, which dramatically increases draw calls. So I'm working on getting that lower. Where is mine specifically? Right, it's this one. Yeah, this one actually performs pretty well. This one I was able to send over to a friend who has a really ancient laptop, and it's really not a very good laptop. and she was able to run this scene at I think she said it was 30 to 40 FPS. Um, and in some spots she got up to 70. But I think that was after she drove off the map and was falling in the abyss, and it wasn't rendering anything but like blue skies, so, or gray skies or something. Once it loads up. But this city that I just loaded in, that one renders out, I think, on one of my friend's PCs that has one of the stronger PCs that I've been testing for. He was saying it's unplayable, so we can't have that. Variation where you can drive over. So Lopi, the point of the game is to so it's called Isekai Crusader Truck-kun's Realm Rescue. And the point of the game is to drive around a city that is based off of Shibuya, the Shibuya area in Tokyo. So you drive around Shibuya and you run over hero candidates, and the hero candidates get transported to another world to save it from demon lords. And there's a lot of pedestrians walking around, and you're supposed to avoid running over pedestrians and only run over hero candidates as much as possible. Obviously you're going to run over a couple pedestrians, but there's two classifications. Well, there might be a game mode where it's just go have fun, like free for all, where it's just like go run over as many people as you can kind of thing, right? Like there's like that would be a very easy game mode to make once the actual game mode is complete. But the idea of the game is to not run over as many people as humanly possible. It's to run over very select people. Kind of like how Hitman, it's like in Hitman you can track down and only kill the actual targets, or you can go on a mass killing spree and still kill the targets. You get penalized for doing it, but you can still do it. Now, the penalization, I don't know what that's going to look like. That could be a time thing. It could be a point system. It could be something. It's hard to say. Maybe like it slows you down. Maybe it does this. Maybe it does that. I'm not entirely sure what I want to do for that. But Polish. Polish? I don't think I get it. Police. Oh. I don't know if police are going to make it into the game, because police are an extra layer of complexity. And I don't entirely know how I would implement them. So until I have a way of until I get to a point where they're necessary. So the way I look at it is there's really not a whole lot that I'm willing to add to the game until after it's complete. When I say complete, I mean like the minimal viable product is complete, then I'll start adding to the game, right? So once I have the things that I deem like these are the minimum things to make this game function, right? Like make my vision a reality, then it's a matter of how can we make it more fun, right? And at that point I don't care what we do, right? So this is the world as it is, right? Yeah. The vehicle right now is a little bit slow, but I'm okay. I'm okay with that. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. Yeah. it makes it hard to oh wow, wait, what? Did I get down to like 70? Oh wow. This area, there's something in this area specifically. There's something here. It might be these. Yeah, this is very poorly optimized, this world so far. There's a lot of extra geometry that doesn't need to be there. Yeah, I can go like this though. So this is a fairly large little city. I'm fairly happy so far with the truck. It's not perfect. There's still a lot of changes that need. Yep, pretty big. This is we haven't even explored it all yet, and it is so far from done. I'm gonna need to make it. I'm gonna need to make some changes out here, specifically because like out here the roads kind of stop, and I'm gonna have to fix that. But for the most part, this area, this city is pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the layout for the most part, but there are some changes that need to be done. Yeah, like I don't think that I can drive under this. Or no, can I? Maybe I can. Let's double check. Yeah, we can. Okay. So lots and lots and lots and lots of work needs to be done on the environment. Uh, it's about big enough. Are you doing the environment on your own? Probably. I'm doing the programming in the environment for the most part. Rem said that he wanted to help with the environment, but you know, he has characters to do. So there are a couple of things that make this much easier than if I picked a different city. So specifically because I picked Japan and Shibuya. Shibuya is actually very clean. So I don't have to worry about like cluttering up the area and stuff like that. It's mostly just getting the roads correct and then laying things out. And like it's time consuming, but it's not overly challenging. It's just a bit time consuming. Is really all it comes down to. But I have some good systems that allow me to do a lot of stuff in a more automated way. So it's not like I have to hand place everything. I can place a lot of things using scripts and stuff like that and not worry too much about it. Yeah. But yeah, this cities are big, especially when you need to drive in them, right? Yeah, yeah, I will, of course. If I had to hand place everything, I would not be able to do this. But if I can automate large swaths of it, then it becomes less of a problem. Automate, right? Also, the city's not quite as big as you might think. It feels bigger than it is. Don't get me wrong, it is a big city. It's still big, but like generators using Houdini, yeah. It's still big, but like it's not like Grand Theft Auto big. Oh yeah, low pi. Uh, one sec. Let's get back to the scenes here. This one here. Check this out. Okay, so this scene here. There is 0 traditional animations happening in this scene. Right? These characters don't have any bones. There's no bones. That character has no bones. The one that I run over, right? Those ragdolls, they have bones. But the character that you see walking doesn't have bones. Those are 2 different meshes. And this one has no bones. It's just a static mesh. Yeah. It's Vertex Animations. Vertex Animations make me happy. Vertex Animations allows me to do this. Yeah, pretty much. Vertex Animations make this game possible. How do you talk about any of this to your friends? What do you mean? I show them a video of me running over schoolgirls in a box truck. What do you mean, how? You just do. Ooh. You killing the entire population. You're killing the entire population of anime characters. No. Goo. I need to do respawning. They're not actually dying, right? So each character that I run over has 2 meshes, right? This is the character that I'm running over here. So there's the ragdoll, has bones, and then the vertex animation character, no bones, right? And what happens is I disable this one, and I enable this one, and then I also disable the walk, so they're not walking around anymore. So they don't move. Their capsule doesn't move when they're ragdolling. And all I need to do is just like respawn them effectively, like completely reset them. And then once they're reset, then we're good. Oh. So you have a material. So you have 2 materials, right? You have your rotation, right? So if you take a look at the top corner here, right? This top corner up here, or if we zoom in, each pixel is an XYZ coordinate for the rotation of a vertex. And you can see how it repeats. You can see the repeat. Each section is 1 frame of the animation. And then you've got another one. So that's the rotation for the pixels, and then for the vertexes, and then this one here, this is the position. So each pixel represents 1 vertex for 1 frame, right? Okay, so if I go like this and we break out paint, I can show you in paint and it will probably make more sense. You bake it. So I'll show you how it works, right? Because how it works will translate into like how you understand it, right? Okay, so if I have a character, right? So I have my character, right? So this is the character. Pretend that it has a walking animation, right? So like if we look at it from the side, it's like right? So what we do is we take a box, like a little bounding box, and we put it around the character. And this, 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 and this is like max locations, max and min locations, right? So the entire animation has to live within this box, right? So this box here is the holds every frame, can try, so we can triangulate every frame. Now, the character has a triangle, right? So let's say we've got a polygon right here. Actually, let's use a different color. We'll use purple for the polygons, right? So we've got a polygon here and maybe like one here and here, right? So we've got a vert here, 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 right here, here, here. And all we're doing is we're saying, hey, relative to this box, what is the x, y, z of this vertex right here? Right? So let's say that this is, 0.5, 0.6, and, 0.01. Right? Now, if I take these colors here and we do red, green, blue, these are all valid red, green, blue values, RGB values. Then we do the same thing with the rotation. So this is position, POS, right? And then we do rotation. And rotations have an X, a Y, and a Z location. So let's say it's 0.01, 0.02, and 0.00. Well, funny enough, these also are valid RGB values. Right? So now what I can do is if I take a an image, right? And we have 1 pixel and we fill it in with the position value. Now I take the rotation, this is going to be the rotation image, and I take 1 pixel and I fill it in with that RGB value, right? Now say that this pixel here, or sorry, this vertex here is vertex 1. So it's pixel 1. And now let's say that we have, we have so many pixels, right? So if we come into here, we have, all of these pixels, right? Let's say that this character here is made up of 10,000 different vertexes, right? So that means that we need 10,000 pixels to make up 1 frame of animation. Yeah. So this would be frame 1 then. Right? And then we'll have F2. and f2 will be another 10,000 pixels. Does that make sense? Then, so this here, because we have this large image and this large image that we have to send over. So now when we send over to the GPU, right? So we have the GPU, right? And then we have our CPU. Oops. So our CPU collects the mesh, these two images, and any other textures that are required to render this thing, sends over to the GPU all of this data, and the GPU can render it out. Now, the only reason why this, even though we're doing more, we're sending over much more data for one character. Like one character will like we're increasing our texture size by potentially like by 2 extra 1K images, right? So we send that over to the GPU, right? And we have to send over these two and the mesh and everything, right? But the reason why this ends up being better for very large amounts is that if we have a bunch of these characters all walking together, right? On with bones, every single one of these has to be processed on the CPU for the bone locations, then sent to the GPU for rendering. Right? Now, what we can do is if we have 1,000 of these, what we do is we send over to the GPU 1,000 coordinates, world coordinates on where to render them. And then we only send all of this data once. So here, this has to be sent twice. This we can send one time to render 1,000. Okay. And then how you make this relative to the individual pixel vertexes is you use UV space. So there's effectively each character will have a minimum of 2 to 3 UVs, right? And one of these UVs, the one that's used for this map, looks like shit. It's like, the entire face will just be here, right? And then like the rest of the texture, it looks so bad. It looks so bad. It'll be like this line in the middle of it. And all we're doing is we're taking this here and we're moving the actual image, right? We're moving this texture image based off of where we want, what frame we want. I don't know if I've got an example of it, but let me see. Interesting and complex. It's really not complex at all. I'll show you. I'll show you what a character looks like. UV space wise, right? So there's my character. Then if we do UVs, this UV, does this one not have the UVs? This one doesn't have UVs. Good times. I'm missing the one with UVs. I thought it was this one. Maybe this one. No, it's not that one. Apparently, I've lost my UVs. Anyways, so you'll have like weird lines, like the UVs for this character, right? This character take up these two like effectively like two lines here, or three lines in UV space, and it's just like entirely just like these long thin strands, right? And it looks you have no way of knowing what anything is. Not everything's collapsed down to like a single pixel, right? Like her skirt is just like entirely collapsed down into like a line, a singular pixel line, right? So that's how we know like what pixel makes which animation, is because of the UVs are literally sitting there, right? And it's effectively like this, the actual animation part of it works exactly the same way as water works in games, right? Where we're not actually simulating all the particles of water. We're just you know having a noise texture on top of something, and it causes it to look like it's flowing, right? But yeah, it's all very interesting. Very cool. Very, very cool. I'm like really itchy today. I'm really itchy and slightly jittery and whatnot. So maybe a little on edge, So I was gonna play around with this. The documentation for this is not amazing so far. Stylized lit shader here. Does this literally just want me to have like a single texture for... I was trying not to do that. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Have a gooders one. If you've got a question, shaders, stylized surfaces. This is a versatile lit shader to be used on rigged object materials, to use it on materials. RP only. Hmm. I was hoping to put in a texture. These output ranges from vivid acid color experimental mess with lots of sweet spots in between. Beginning to work with the stylized shader, create a material in the inspector panel in the shader drop-down menu. Now you can apply this material to a 3D game object on your scene in the hierarchy panel. There's of the stylized lit shader. Gradient. This is one of the highlight features of Cubalil? No. Only gradient also refers to as gradient editor. Lets you dial up the 8 independent colors per single material. You can make the color bands as wide or as narrow as you want. That's not really what I wanted, though. Like, this is all just like each material needs to be one color. What if I want an albedo map? Like, the input for a diffuse texture, select a. Okay, here we go. Texture maps is a collapsible / expandable group of parameters that control the albedo map, normal, and detail maps. To these parameters, please make sure the model is UV unwrapped. The input for a diffuse texture, select the texture by clicking on the select texture slot. Tiling, shrink, and repeat. I'm not seeing it is the problem. So I bring this in. We go to the materials, right? This is the material in question. Oh, wait. I see it now. Interesting. We're not seeing any textures at all. Sure, the back is black, but we're not seeing any outline. Huh. I didn't like it. Oh well. We'll have to come back to that. Or we do it now. YouTube.com. I don't know if we can actually use these things. That sucks. Unity.
There's a number of times during development I found myself working on some code and getting stuck in the weeds trying to improve performance with a loop that's been taking just a tad bit too long. If you're working in a simulation or procedural generation genre, you're probably familiar with the long waiting times while your algorithm runs and the results get processed. The funny thing is, what if I told you that you've accidentally been inflicting that pain on yourself? And rather than having to deal with stripping back your complex pathfinding AI or your terrain generation algorithm that takes minutes on end to calculate, you could actually speed it up significantly in just a few lines of code by offloading that complex algorithm of yours from that old, dusty CPU you're so familiar with, and partnering it up with that shiny new, clever little GPU everyone's been talking about. Hi there, I'm Matt, and welcome to Game Dev Guide. In this video, we're going to explore how to get started with compute shaders and compute buffers in Unity. Two phrases that I'm sure are very intimidating to many of you watching. My own perception of them certainly changed rather rapidly a few weeks ago as I began learning about them, and I've realized they're actually a lot less daunting than you may initially think. Hopefully by the end of this video, you'll learn a few things about them and they'll be a little bit more approachable to you. So first, let's break things down and explain the concept of a compute shader. Essentially, the purpose of a compute shader is to offload some of the processing from your CPU onto your GPU, and so they're written in high-level shader language, or HLSL, in Unity. Hence the name compute shader. Due to being able to run chunks of code in parallel, they can be incredibly useful for processing large algorithms and in many cases handle specific rendering tasks much faster than C# can. While not exclusive to compute shaders, compute buffers are essentially chunks of data that the compute shader can process. They're not actually required for compute shaders to work at all, but they're how you'll read and write data from the shader if you want to use a compute shader for computation rather than just rendering. Now, before we get stuck in, it's worth mentioning that prior knowledge of writing complex HLSL shaders isn't entirely necessary for you to understand this video, but a grasp on the basics of programming in HLSL versus C# is definitely going to help you understand this a lot better. If you're brand new to shaders entirely, I've posted some resources down in the description that you might find useful in getting started. If you're anything like me, one of the biggest grievances you have is the lack of support for IntelliSense and formatting when writing shader code in Visual Studio. I made the switch to VS Code when I discovered a plugin that makes writing HLSL code much easier. It's not perfect, but seeing as the alternative is just walls of white text and a recurring loop of typos in Visual Studio, I cannot recommend it enough. With all that out of the way, let's finally dive into creating our first compute shader. So as I've already mentioned, compute shaders can be used for a variety of things, and we'll get into a couple of examples of those in a few minutes. For now though, let's just start with something simple to get to grips with how they work. Let's create a new compute shader, and let's just call it compute shader example or something similar. If we open this up, we can see that Unity generates a basic template for us, and you may notice that it's already very different to a standard fragment.
Environment shader.
Vertex shader. The way I like to think about this is that a compute shader is structured more like an extension of a C# script, just written in shader language instead. The CS main method here is the main function for our compute shader, and it's the code that we'll run when we dispatch it from C#. The line at the top here dictates the kernel.
This is different. What is a compute shader? What is a compute shader? Oh yeah, that's not what we're looking for.
Hello, Amiga Fire. Hello, Jomaka. Hello, Doodle Trap. Hello, average person. I'm glad I got the average person in here. That's neat. Okay. I mentioned this last time when we did the math course that I'm going to try to have this be a very practical and visual approach to what we're doing in order to get into shaders. As before, feel free to ask questions at any moment. I will be primarily reading the chat, the Future Games private chat. One of the questions people have quite a lot is like, what is a shader? And some people ask the question of like, do I need shaders in my project or should I use shaders? And the easy answer to that is that you kind of don't have a choice. Everything in a game is rendered with shaders. There are some exceptions, but these days, pretty much every game you play are like rendered with shaders absolutely everywhere. So what is a shader? You can think of a shader as code running on your GPU. That is kind of the most generalized way that I can think think of defining shaders. But in this case, we're going to focus on shaders that specifically render graphics onto your screen. And quite often what you do is that you define a bunch of parameters, like maybe the position of an object. You have data such as a mesh you want to render. Maybe you want to render a cat in a game. Then you have a mesh of that cat, and then you have some way that defines the way that that surface should look, and sometimes even move. And that code is shader code. So shaders are, like, because of the way they work, is that they are absolutely ubiquitous. Like absolutely everywhere in games, you're going to find many, many different types of shaders that do all sorts of different effects. So I was thinking we could start by just like showing some examples of what that could look like in games, right? Because I feel like it's not very tangible to not have any like visual reference for this. So shaders are more like normal maps rather than diffuse textures. Shaders are completely unrelated to textures. Textures are input data that shaders can use if you want to, but you don't have to. So normal maps and diffuse textures are examples of data that we often use in shaders, but shaders are more about taking the information from textures, or sometimes just other parameters or values or colors, and then running a bunch of math on that, and then outputting it to your screen. A diffuse texture, for instance, is usually something that contains the color of the surface. And if you want to render an object where you have different colors on the surface and you want to define that using a texture, you can do that if you want. But you also don't have to use textures. In fact, most of the work that I've done in the past like 4 years have almost entirely been textureless, because I don't know, I like math and I like doing things procedurally. And most of the games that I do tend to have an art style that doesn't require that many textures. So last night I logged on to Final Fantasy and I took a bunch of screenshots because I thought this might be a good case study. Let's actually open a game, take a bunch of screenshots, and then just look at what is happening on the screen and how does this relate to shaders. So let's jump into all of my screenshots. I've been playing Final Fantasy all holiday, so I haven't been doing much else. So of course I'm going to continue doing things related to that.
I love how two of the big names in like shader development are both Final Fantasy players.
Okay, so let's open up some examples here. Okay, there we go. So this is a screenshot from Final Fantasy. And Final Fantasy it's an MMO, and MMOs usually have a lot of like VFX and particle effects. As you can see in this case, my character is doing an attack, so there's this big like ring thing happening. There are impact effects on the screaming dog, where you have some wisps up here. And you can see that they're sort of arranged in a circular pattern here as well. There's another one here and another one here. And usually these types of things are a combination of particle effects and also meshes that have specialized shaders that run for like that type of effect that you're trying to achieve. So for instance, we try to break this down and try to figure out like how is this whole thing constructed, right? We can try to think of, okay, so maybe this disk here, this could be a single quad, as in a mesh with two triangles, right? And then on top of that, you have like some sort of circular, swirly VFX type of thing, right? So you render that on that quad. And there are some like glowing vertical stripes here. This could either be a particle effect, or like very small individual light strips. It could also be a cylinder mesh that simply has a texture that goes along the edges that gives it all those glowy stripes, right? Same thing goes for the dog. You can see that there's all the rings here. That could be a single quad that kind of encapsulates all of the effects there, and then that has some sort of texture on it. The flare here, very likely a particle, probably also just a single quad with a flare texture on it. Same thing with this thing right here, and so forth. And you can sort of like try to break the effects down in this way and try to figure out, how is all of this constructed. And what shaders allow you to do is basically customize this in almost any way you want. So rather than just having textures, you can also animate these. You can blend them with other things. You can tell them to render additively, or they can multiply into the scene. So there are many, many different ways of doing this. So here's another example where the different particles use different blending modes. So blending mode is just a way of like saying how should this combine with the background. So I can actually show an example in Photoshop. You can see that this one kind of adds a glow whenever I draw with this blending mode. I can set a blending mode to multiply. If I do that, it's going to multiply in, which in this case reduces the color values, so usually darkens, right? So there are many different ways of blending it. And then you also, of course, have the regular blending mode, which is usually just alpha blending or alpha compositing, where we're kind of like rendering something on top of something else. So these are very, very distinct ways of rendering something on top of something else, right? So we can like try to look at this. So how can we break this down? Well, we can see that there's like sort of an orange halo here, right? That seems to darken the background. So we can presume that that is a multiplicative effect that is darkening that background. Then we can look at some of the other ones. Seems like the black ones here might not actually modify the background that much, so they're probably alpha blended, like the blue one up there. All the glowy white ones here are almost certainly additive, which means that they're going to brighten the background. Yeah, so those are different blend modes. When you say particle in this context, you're talking about engine stuff, right? The GPU shader code just sees a quad and it doesn't know what a particle, and it's just a mesh. Pretty much, yeah. So if we talk about like individual shaders, then shaders are generally what is dealing with each individual component of all of these things, right? So if we want to count how many shaders we have here, it is possible that this only has 3 shaders. It could be that, it's kind of hard to tell without actually having the game at hand, but it could be that there's one shader that deals with multiply, as in the multiply blend mode. And there could be another one that deals with additive, and there could be another one that does alpha blending. And then what can happen is that you use these 3 shaders, but you use them in different contexts and with different inputs. We're going to get into that later, how the structure of like shaders versus materials and all that, kind of going into too much detail here. I'm supposed to just quickly go through these. Okay, what else? Here's another interesting example. So this one has a refraction in it. Refraction is usually when you take some usually background and then you distort it. So if you want to have like heat waves above a road or something, then you can sometimes use refraction in order to distort some image. Underwater effects also use a lot of distortion. We can see that the character is here and then there's a distorted version here. It's a little hard to tell how it works when it's not in motion. I didn't have time to record thing in motion. Here's another example when you like kind of mash all of these together. This is more about VFX than it is about shaders, I suppose. But you can do a lot of like fancy effects if you combine a lot of things together, right? So in this case, you can sort of trace out all the different disks you have here, right? There's one going here, there's a circular one going there, and you can see that with the combination of all of this, you can achieve a lot of effects, right? So if we try to break down the shaders of these, then again, we're probably going to look at one additive shader here for anything that's glowing, and then this looks like an alpha blended one for stuff that shouldn't make things brighter. This should just darken things, right? We want to blend toward the color of that we have defined in this probably particle effects, right? Another example of a lot of different planes. This is also something that sort of goes outside of what you do in particle effects. If you talk about Unity's particle effects system, doing something like this is generally pretty hard because particle effects usually deal with a lot of particles naturally, and they're usually kind of scattered in many different places. But often you have cases like this where you have a very defined structure, right? Where you want to draw these like strips on the ground with a lot of these symbols. So these are likely 2 triangles, right, for each of these. I cannot draw a straight line. Anyway, yeah, so that's probably just a quad, and then you have another mesh that goes it's sort of like the edges of a cube, very likely, that goes along here. You can sort of follow the shape, I hope. And then of course, yeah, everything's triangled, so the mesh is going to be triangulated like this. So what the shader can then do, the shader has the mesh that is this inverted cube with only the walls, right? And then what you can do then in the shader is that you have lots of textures you can combine in different ways. So you can see that there's this pink smoke-like effects. So this is very likely a texture that is mapped along this whole shape. There are some like multiply effects here that like darken the background that could be part of another render pass of this cube, I'm not sure, and so forth. So usually this kind of goes outside of what you can do with particle effects. This is more, you have a mesh, and then you want to make it look a very, very specific, magical way, and that is something you can do with shaders. Okay, should I go through more examples, or is it boring you at this point? I probably took too many screenshots. Same thing here. It's a big ground texture, a lot of like additive glowy effects. There's these little daggers pointing to the ground, and all of these are probably also just simple quads and stuff, right? This became a VFX course now. It's not about shaders anymore, it's about VFX. Oh, here's a good one. You can even use shaders in UI. So this is an example of a progress bar that sort of has this mask on top of it in order to have all these symbols. But what's happening underneath these symbols is that there's a progress bar that's going to render inside of these. You can see that it's halfway filled here, where it's sort of going up to this point. So this is also a very good use case for shaders. You can make a single shader that renders this thing, and then you have input data that says what is the percentage of fill on this bar, right? And then using that, you can then just define exactly how you want this to look, depending on how much you've stored in this bar, right? Same thing goes for like a lot of MMOs have like markings on their icons. So these little dashes around the edge here, they are also animated and move around in a circle. You could do that using a shader. There are lots of like circular progress bars you can also define in a shader, or you can do it with sprite sheets. Usually makes things easier than custom shaders for everything. Here's more render pipeline related one. So shadows. If you want to make shadows in a game, that also requires a lot of processing on the GPU, because quite often your GPU needs information about everything in the world in order to cast shadows like this, right? So if we look at the scene, most of the background is pretty well lit. There are some shadows here in the background. They're cast here. There's a building here that is casting this pretty complex shadow, right? Because it's following the shape of the edge of the roof of this building, right? And it also like casts realistically on top of all of these objects. So that continues there. And then even for dynamic shadows for the character, there's shadows going underneath there, shadows going across here, going all the way down there, right? And this is another process that you tend to do on the GPU. And there are many different ways of doing shadows, but it's kind of interesting that like some of the techniques you use to cast shadows is that you kind of render the scene from the point of view of the light source, and you only render how far away geometry is. And then you can use that information in your usual frame that you're rendering here in the game to know whether or not shadow or light is going to hit a certain point or not, right? So another example, the skin is a pretty difficult thing to render, it turns out. Skin has a lot of properties that generally most like solid objects in the world don't have. So one thing that you might notice when skin is rendered in some game is that usually there's some highlight where the light source is hitting, right? This is the highlight on the cheek, and then you can see that it sort of fades to shadow in this direction, right? And then you have a shadow line here, right? So one thing that skin has, which is a very like specialized thing, is usually called subsurface scattering. Subsurface scattering means that light sort of enters something. So if you have a surface, you have light rays coming in. In many cases, if it's a perfect mirror, light would just bounce off of it, right? But in some cases, light can actually enter, and then light can scatter around inside of some surface and then hop out somewhere else. What happens is that usually some wavelengths are absorbed when this happens. So it could be that you have white light coming in, but then once it starts to scatter inside of the skin, some wavelengths are absorbed, and you can get a more red tinted light coming out of it, because the greens and the blues have been absorbed, so mostly red is coming out. So quite often with skin is that you get this red tinted shade here. What happens in the transition where you get less light, but then the scattered light keeps spreading out of that. You don't need to know how to do all of these things. I'm kind of just going through of like what you can do with shaders and some examples from, in this case, from Final Fantasy. And then there are all sorts of properties of all of these surfaces, right? For instance, the lower lip has a very glossy highlight here, right? But the cheeks don't. There's not a glossy highlight here, or on the nose, or like nothing like that, right? They're pretty matte. So all of these things are things you need to define in the shader. Where do we want things to be glossy? Where do we want things to be matte? Where do we want to have subsurface scattering, and so forth. Let's see, what else? Oh, hair rendering is surprisingly difficult, but I don't know if we should get into all of the details of that. Here's another good thing to talk about. Someone mentioned normal maps before. Normal maps are kind of a way to add more geometry data, or what looks like geometry data, without actually adding geometry. So quite often, you're making meshes with triangles, so we can try to like sort of work out what the mesh looks like here. This is a pretty low poly mesh, right? You can see that it's very jagged, but the internals of it looks pretty detailed, right? It looks like a pretty smooth curved surface. All of these intricate details look really nice. But what the geometry likely looks like, if I were to guess, is that I would probably have a very, very simple structure. Actually, I can see that one now. I'm guessing it would be something like this. So it's sort of just like a very simple low poly cone, but with certain textures, you can make a normal map which encodes the data about the direction that a surface is pointing. And with that data, we can make it look as if it's being shaded, as if there's geometry there. Same thing goes with this. This doesn't actually exist in the triangle data, but if we have that encoded into a texture, we can then use that texture in order to get more detail out of it instead of just adding geometry all the time, right? Especially in like an MMO where you're gonna have to have like a lot of characters in one place, and adding geometry detail that's like super high poly to that is not gonna work out well, right? So you need some shortcuts to add more detail where there is none, right? So we're gonna do normal maps probably on Thursday, I think, depending on how far we go. All right, let's see. Let's switch game. Overwatch. What game? So we can see sort of the same concepts here. Like regardless of what game we're looking at, we can almost always just take a screenshot and then sort of break down what's happening in the frame. So Overwatch is kind of interesting in many ways. One thing that Blizzard tend to do in their games is they have a lot of like specialized shaders in their UI. So this glow, for instance, is sort of like an additive particle effect, but it's in your UI instead of in the world. And obviously in the world there are tons and tons of different particle effects. You have like Roadhog's gun. You've got like an additive thing here. And I can't draw for some reason. Oh, right underneath. Great. And then you have the Reinhardt's barrier. This one looks like it's very glowy. Could be additively rendered. And then you have some refraction here again. You can see that there's like a distortion bubble here. It might be hard to tell on stream. But you can see that it distorts this path here. There's a smoke trail coming here that also gets a little distorted. What else? We have Tracer, just did a blink thing, maybe reverse. I don't know which effect this is. This is probably the teleportation thing. So you can see that Tracer is rendered completely differently here, right? So very likely Tracer's shader has just been completely swapped to some other shader, right? Everybody else is rendered like with their normal textures and whatnot, but Tracer in this case has an entirely different one. And this particular type of shader is usually called a Fresnel shader. Fresnel is an absolutely ubiquitous term that you're going to hear about too much. F-R-E-S-N-E-L, because yay, French names. Fresnel. So what Fresnel basically means that as something is starting to face away from you, you get a stronger light. So you can see that the edges are kind of lit up here, right? But the middle is not lit up. So it's almost an outline effect, but it's not actually an outline effect. And it's kind of important to know the difference between the two. Right, another example of Fresnel, Roadhog in this case is being frozen, and it's probably a bit more visible here to see how it works. So you can see that if you look at his hand, for instance, stuff that is kind of directly facing the camera, in which case like this part of the thumb, does not have this glowy effect. It only starts happening for surfaces that are facing away from you, right? The Roadhog's hook here, for instance, is also facing away from you more so than this part of the thumb, and therefore it's brighter, right? And this part has a very, very steep angle, so this whole thing is very bright. So this is a very useful, simple way of getting a sort of like outline effect, highlighting objects, and so forth. Another one, Winston's shield, similar thing. This shader also has some like extra features for, because this is a spherical bubble, but it can intersect with the world in different places. So it intersects with the ground here, and then it makes it so that there's a bit of a light going around that edge, so it kind of follows around the whole bubble. It also intersects with the world up here, right? So even though it's intersecting with pretty complicated geometry here, it can still maintain to do this like whole outline thing. Yeah, usually that's done with like depth factory and whatnot, but do Fresnel have relations with Rimlight, or am I confusing them with each other? They are usually related, but they're not the same thing. There are all sorts of things that are called Fresnel. If you start reading up on like physically based shading, you're gonna find the word Fresnel in terms of like physical light propagation, which is slightly different than the artistic usage of just a Fresnel shader. Yeah, but the idea is that as the angle towards some surface versus the camera is very low, something happens, right? We're going to make a Fresnel shader later, so we can see it in action if you want to. Here's a screenshot from Demon Souls, and you might tell that there's a bit of a highlight effect on the character. This too is Fresnel. Everything is Fresnel. Fresnel is everywhere. No matter what game you're getting into, there's going to be Fresnel somewhere. Exactly the same effect. You get like a glow around the edges, and as the surfaces are pointing toward you, that glow sort of disappears and it fades to darkness. Yeah, so it's exact same principle. It is important to note though that Fresnel is kind of only like it works best for surfaces that have relatively smooth surfaces. As soon as things get sharp, you don't really get the same outline effect. As you can see, the shield here doesn't actually really have that type of highlight, not even close compared to like around the knees here, right? So they're a little bit separate, but it's just very, very easy hack to add to your stuff. And it also looks a little different than an actual outline effect. This is a game, Return of the Oberdin. Very, very different usage of shaders. We've been sort of looking at more VFX and realistic stuff. This is another game that is heavily using shaders, but for an entirely different artistic purpose, right? So the Return of Oberdin is a game that is only using two colors. There's, well, it's not exactly black, but it's pretty much just black and white. And then in order to express shading, they use dithering in the game. So yeah, so like this is something that you can do with shaders too. And like this is like perfect for shaders because they deal with these types of like graphical things. And then you can yeah, do all sorts of artistic effects like this. Another example is something less realistic is Kentucky Route Zero. This is one of my favorite point-and-click games. It's super, super nice and atmospheric. Kentucky Route Zero also has a very, very like minimalistic art style, but even though it's very minimalistic, there are lots of places where they use shaders for artistic effect, right? So in this case, you can see that they're playing a lot with depth in this one, because if you look at the trees here, the bird is in front of these trees, but the fog implies that these parts are in the background. So this is a like very like the trippy effect, the trippy game that employs all sorts of like graphical things to achieve their like artistic vision, right? And you wouldn't be able to do this if you were just using like Unity's built-in shaders, right? So really what shaders are about is allowing you to expand your visual horizons, right? I thought that was sorting of the sprites. All of this is dynamic, and so if you move the camera and the geometry, it's kind of difficult to do this without like coding that into the shaders, but maybe you can do it with just sorting as well. But regardless, sorting on something is dealing with the graphical aspects of this, which is dealing with shaders, right? That was a very long just walkthrough of random shit in games. Oh, I actually had a few like separate examples. Here's an example from a game that I worked on. It's made in my studio, Neatcorp. So this is the portal locomotion system in Budget Pass. So in this case, this one has a very, very specialized shader for dealing with opening up this portal, right? So you use this portal to move between locations and rooms. That's pretty much what this does. So you can see that you open up a portal into a different room, and then this renders into that portal that's sitting in your hand, and you can still see anything outside of that, right? And yes, this is a VR game. And then when you teleport, this bubble sort of expands and encapsulates your entire field of view, and then once it's encapsulated your field of view, you're standing at the new location. And we wanted this to, of course, be like a completely seamless experience, so we didn't want to have any jarring like flashes happening, or we didn't want to approximate this either. We wanted it to be look exactly like you're just like smoothly moving to the new location, right? It's the second camera for the render texture. It used to be, but it's not anymore. Because turns out having a like rendering things in VR, you generally have to do things very high resolution because you have you need a lot of pixels for it to look good because you have a very wide field of view when you're wearing a VR headset. So you need a lot of pixels. It's usually a higher resolution than 1080p or whatever. And if you want to have another render texture for the portal, that usually means that you're going to have another full screen render texture, which is a lot of memory, especially if you want to like target the lower end platforms. Here's a very simple example. This is from another game I'm working on called Flowstorm. With this little rocket here. So this is another VFX shader. It's this rocket flame is a single quad. It's two triangles, and then everything else is done in the shader. So you can see that it's sort of bending when the rocket turns. It changes color when you stop or start accelerating. Yeah, and the little flakes, that is a particle effect. But everything else is done in the shader itself. A water shader I made for another game at Neatcorp. So that game is very, very stylized. So in this case, I wasn't like aiming for realistic water whatsoever, but I wanted it to look really colorful and yeah, very lush and pleasant to look at. So then you tend to want to get these like you want to have a little foam bridge along the edge. You want to have some cute specular highlights, and you want to have this gradient that goes from like tropical cyan and then down to the deeper blues. Right here is not my shader. This is from Uncharted. Uncharted, the team working on Uncharted have like some of the best technical artists out there. So usually, if you want to look at really, really, really high end like AAA shaders, they do really good work there. So this is a lot of things are happening here, of course, but the surface of the water is going to be one shader. You have some particle effects for all the smoke there. There's even a rainbow. Like there are lots of things happening. But this is again stuff you can do with shaders. Oh, and the rocks as well. We haven't looked at boring objects, but all the boring objects have shaders too. I'm mostly talking about the more like exceptional cases, so you can't really do only using the built-in shaders, right? Okay. All right. Any questions so far? I guess there's nothing to ask about. I just mentioned that shaders exist in games. Does the portal shader have a field for position of the current portal, and then it just renders stuff from that position in a circular viewport? The way that it works right now is a little complicated to explain, but the quality of making shaders in Unity. So
Okay. This is a little too free flow. I think maybe this might be
Hello,
more
my name
what
is
we're
Ben,
looking for
and
here.
welcome. If it's your first time here to this channel is about writing CG or HLSL shaders from scratch within Unity. So in today's video, what we're going to talk about is the basics of a shader. We're going to create a shader from scratch, go through it line by line, and I'm going to try my best to explain what it all means. So if you're completely new to shading, you're completely new to CG or HLSL shader code, this is the video for you. So as you can see here, I already have Unity open, and it has a lot of files here because this is actually my Unity course. But let's not worry too much about that because it will serve the purposes of this video. So what I have here set up is a plane, just a simple plane with a standard shader on top of it. And what we're going to do is we're going to create our first shader. Go to this folder, it's empty right now, and I'm going to go right click, create shader, unlit shader. And the reason why I choose unlit shader because it has the basic structure of what we need. I'm just going to call it my first shader. Cool. So that's created. I'm going to go ahead and apply it to our material. The first thing I'm going to do is actually do a little bit of renaming. So I've opened it right here, and this is the Unity default unlit shader kind of structured how we want.
Create shader. Do I want an unlit or do I want a lit shader? I've been doing a lot in unlit. And it might be worth it. Because I honestly don't know if I want to use lit or unlit. Unity anime shader.
Hello everyone, I'm Darol, and in this quick tutorial I'll show you how to give your Unity characters a stylized or an anime-inspired look. You know the cel-shaded looks in games like Genshin Impact and Zelda? I'll show you how to recreate that style in your own project. We're talking big beautiful eyes, shaded lines, all the hallmarks of stylized graphics. By the end of this quick tutorial you'll have the skills to upgrade your game's visuals to the next level, so let's get started. First, open Unity and create a new project, or if you already have one, it's fine. In my case, I use my existing one, but feel free to create a new one. You can use either the built-in render pipeline or the universal render pipeline, whichever you prefer. I will be using the Unity Toon Shader for this. It's completely free and simple. I've linked to the documentation in the description, so you can easily access it. And now click on installation and check that you have Git installed. If not, then type in your browser Git download, not GitHub, just Git. Click the first link that appears and select your operating system, then download it. I've already done it, so I can close it. For model, it's, in my case, it's from Genshin Impact. It's not my character. I've not created it. It's from DeviantArt. I've just downloaded, and I will link the publisher in the description. So import the model into Unity, add package from Git URL, select create, click on material, then
Do you want to go from this to this? Or from this to this? Please, keep watching and I'm gonna show you how. Hello guys, welcome to my first video tutorial. I'm gonna show you how to set up your
Unity anime shader tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll learn how to write a lit toon shader. You will write a custom shader for Unity UPR using HLSL. The shader will receive light from a single directional light and will cast and receive shadows. This tutorial is based on Unity 2021.3. I think we're just after that, right? Anyways. I'm Michael, the developer behind Oka Software. I'm writing this tutorial to help you learn about shaders and improve your Unity skills. I want your games to be a success. So I'm happy to do whatever it takes to help empower you and help you build your project. As a developer for Aka software, I created 3 toon shaders, toon shader assets. I don't want what? Okay, whatever. That fit different use cases and different types of projects, and I developed more than 30 assets for Unity, and more than 20,000 game developers use my game assets to help players fall in love with their games. If you want to learn more about custom shaders in Unity, I'm your guy. Okay. Introduction to toon shaders. So what is it? What is toon shading anyways? Toon shading is a type of expensive rendering. You can most easily understand expressive rendering. Expressive rendering in the contrast to photorealistic rendering. Photorealistic rendering aims to accurately render materials as the human eye would perceive it using physically based rendering algorithms. In context, expressive rendering aims to enable art-driven rendering to achieve specific visual styles. Toon shading is also sometimes called cell shading. According to Wikipedia, the name cell shading comes from cells, short for celluloids, clear sheets of acrylic, which were painted on for use in traditional 2D animation. I'll just say that this was before my time and move on. Yeah. It's not done that way anymore. I think one of the most famous ones was Disney, the way Disney did it. Toon shading is most often used to mimic the look of traditional cartoons, comics, and animations. This shading style is characterized by having a limited number of discrete shades of color to create a flat look with blocks of color. Toon shading typically features some specular highlights as well as rim lighting. Outline shaders. In many projects that use toon shading, artists also often use outline shaders to further sell the cartoon look. Outline rendering is a complex topic on its own, so it is outside of the scope of this tutorial. You will typically see toon shading applied only on character models with level geometry rendered using traditional cell shading techniques. Example of toon shading. At this point, I'm sure you're wondering whether toon shading has been used in production titles. I am not. If you're familiar with the gaming world and you already know the answer, in the the answer is around sounding yes to do. Wait, what's this? I've never heard of this game. It looks good. Do. Before we start writing our shaders, we will set up a simple test environment, create a new scene and open it, add a plane, center it on the origin, add a sphere, set the world's position to 0, 0, 0, 1, move your camera. Note the newly created Toon Shader material asset in the project view. Okay, so we're going to be doing a lit shader, lit Toon Shader. I think. Wait. I don't know what type of shader this is. I guess this would just be like what if I do this, we'll just create standard surface shader. You did populate this shader with what appears to be helpful. Unfortunately, the code in the shader is applicable to the built-in render pipeline. We are not using built-in render pipeline for this tutorial, therefore this code is 100% useless. We'll need to write our own boilerplate. Fortunately, I made boilerplate files for you that you can download and import directly on your project. Now, this is when you say thank you, Michael. I suppose. Thank you, Michael. The properties, color map, color, subshader. See how much of this is the same. Wait, what? This is our .shader file. Oh, okay. Add our HLS. How do I add that? I think I need a plugin, right? We'll update since we're probably going to be restarting anyways. Marketplace. H. Oh, okay, so it's already there. Okay. Don't think that's quite what it is that I was looking for. Where do I create this? How do I create this? I've not created this. This is kind of like where I'm at a file. Oops. I think that's still a little bit too advanced and we should probably come down. I'm going to just get rid of some of this. Universal rendering pipeline. Shader tutorial. Writing shaders. Please don't have a super thick accent.
Hey guys, Bigstrick here. Recently I made a video about custom shadows in Unity.
Let's say you find shader graph
Hell
confusing
yeah.
to read or hard to manage. Then I would say you're a programming person at the heart. Deep down, you always wanted to write shaders, but finds the documentation a bit lacking. Then I would say you're at the right place. Today, I will show you how to write shaders from the scratch. For the tutorial, I will use Unity 6, and my project is set up in URP. I'm the BGC Guru, and I know this will be a little bit late, but Happy New Year. Alright, let's get started. Alright, I have this scene. Now first I will create a shader, so right click, create, shader. Let's go unlit shader. I will call it my URP unlit, and double click to open it up. Here I have some code which tells us delete. Now in Unity we write shaders using two languages, ShaderLab and HLSL. ShaderLab is Unity-specific language and is used to define the structure and the metadata of our shader, and HLSL is the language where we write the actual shader instructions. Alright, we will start off with ShaderLab, so I'll just go shader, then I'll give the name of my shader, my URP unlit.
Wait, does this guy actually cover that? Because like this guy has stuff in here that is not relevant Or yeah. Okay, wait. Let's our boilerplate consists of two files, a .shader file and a .hls file. Our .shader file has include directives that cause the contents of our HLSL file to be automatically imported to our .shader file. We structure our file this way because it makes it easier for us to split up our boilerplate shader pass setup and params directive from our core shader function. It also makes it easier for us to share the same core shader functions across multiple shader processes. Okay. In this boilerplate setup, we have 4 shader passes. If we write our code inline, we need to copy and paste our code in 4 separate places, once for each pass. By using the include approach, we only have to write our code once. Let me reread that. I don't think I quite caught that. In this boilerplate setup, we have 4 shader passes. If we write our code inline, we need to copy and paste our code in 4 separate places, once for each pass. By using the include approach, we can... Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Understanding the shader boilerplate. The high level shaders consist of the following elements: shader name, shader properties, C buffer, properties, block, shader subshaders, shader lab commands, passes, and pass names, light mode tags, HLSL code blocks, HLSL program, and HLS vertex and fragment functions. A custom editor binding, if applicable. I will go into detail on each of these elements as part of this tutorial, but just be aware that they exist and that I set all of this up for you in the boilerplate download. Also be aware that we will need to go back and add new properties to the properties block, which means we also need to add new properties to the C buffer block as well. Oh. Take a few minutes to explore the .shader file and .shader and .HLSL file to familiarize yourself with them. I wrote dozens of comments to explain the purpose of nearly every line of code, so take a look. Cannot resolve vertex, of course. ERP requires us to set a C buffer or constraint buffer of constraint variables. These should be the same variables we set up in the properties. The C buffer is required for Unity to correctly handle per material changes, as well as batching / instancing. Do not skip it. I don't see the C buffer necessarily here. Our attribute struct is simple. It contains the object space position, the normal direction, as well as the UV0 coordinates of the mesh. the attributes struct is passed from the GPU to the vertex function. This line is required for VRSPI to work. The varying struct is also straightforward. It contains the clip space position, the UV, and the world space normals. The varying passed from the vertex function to the fragment function. Oops. I'll be right back. I need drink. I need drinkage. have snack and water and tea, and I'm gonna spend the entire day just doing fucking shader stuff apparently. I don't really like this guy's tutorial so far.
And someone asked me to make a tutorial out of it.
And here I can also define the category, so I could go custom slash, and then just open close curly braces. Now here I can define property block, where I can define the material property which can be tweaked from the inspector. And for now, I'm not going to use any properties, so I'll just comment it. Then here I'll define a subshader block. Subshader block is used to divide our shader in parts that targets different hardware and rendering pipeline. For example, if you're developing a shader that targets URP and HDRP, you will write two subshader blocks, one for URP and one for HDRP. Now my project is in URP and that's not going to change, so I'll just write a single subshader block. Now here I can define LOD levels, which I'm not going to do. Then I can define tags, which are just key value pairs. Now you can of course define your custom tags here, but there are predefined ones such as
I'm not super opposed to the guy's tutorial, but oops.
Now my project is in URP and that's not going to change, so I'll just write a single subshader block. Now here I can define LOD levels, which I'm not going to do. Then I can define tags, which are just key value pairs. Now you can of course define your custom tags here, but there are predefined ones such as rendering pipeline equals universal pipeline. This tag indicates that, okay, the shader is targeted for URP. Then there's render type tag equals, let's say, opaque. Now this tag is more or less only a debugging tag, and it doesn't have that much impact on the actual shader. Let's say opaque. Now this tag is more or less only a debugging tag, and it doesn't have that much impact on the actual shader instructions. Now there are other predefined tags as well, like for rendering queue, to enable or disable shadow casting. You can of course look that up in the documentation, but for now I'll just use these two. Then here I will define a pass block. Pass block is where your actual shader instruction will go. You can of course have multiple passes within a single subshader. For example, you could have a pass that calculates the basic color and light data, and another shadow casting pass so that this current geometry will cast the shadow. Or if I were to apply a per object or per material outline, I could have a custom pass for that as well. Then here you can define a name. Let's call it unlit pass. Then here I can also define the tags. Of course, you can define your custom tags here as well, but there are predefined one here as well. For example, light mode equals always, which means always render this pass and don't calculate any lights. Now, this is the default value, so if you don't write this tag, this always will be the default one. Now here you can set some GPU commands. For example, you can set blending mode here, or depth test mode, cull mode, etc. But for now, let's just keep it empty. Then here, we'll finally write some HLSL command, and for that we will go HLSL program and end HLSL. And within this block, we will write our vertex and fragment shader. First, I will go hash pragma, then vertex, and I'll give a name of my vertex shader, so vertex. And this is just a name, so you can of course give any value here, but the vortex makes sense. Similarly, I'll go hash pragma fragment, and then I'll call the fragment shader function fragment as well. Then I'll do
Okay, what? Why are these red? These are showing up as...
find them both here, so void vortex. Then fragment shader always returns a color value, so vector 4, so I'll go half.
So why is this happening? This is where we would do the include here in HLSL, right?
Four, which is vector 4 with 16-bit float precision. Then I'll define them both here, so void. We will write our vertex and fragment shader. First, I will go hash pragma, then vertex, and I'll give a name of my vertex shader, so vertex. And this is just a name, so you can of course give any value here, but the vortex makes sense. Similarly, I'll go hash pragma fragment, and then I'll call the fragment shader function fragment as well. Then I'll define them both here, so void vortex. Then fragment shader always returns a color value, so vector 4, so I'll go half 4, which is vector 4 with 16-bit float precision. You can of course use float 4 here as well, but I'll just go half 4 fragment, and then I'll tag it with sv underscore target, and open close curly braces. For now, let's just go return half 4 of, let's just return a red color. So when I made a typo here, so it's just render pipeline. And let's just get rid of this tags for now. So I guess that's the default one. In the Unity, my cube is just get rid of this tags for now. So I guess that's the default one.
Created material from the shader and applied it into this cube. Okay, I want to create a material from this shader and apply it to this.
In the Unity, my cube is just disappeared, and I don't have any error in my shader file, but I can't see my cube as well. And the reason is, I'll just tell my GPU to draw the geometry red. I haven't specified where on the screen it has to actually draw the geometry. So I'll just tell my GPU to draw the geometry red. I haven't specified where on the screen it has to actually draw the geometry. So let's fix it. In my shader, I will define a structure, so struct, let's call it attributes. And I'm calling this attributes because the actual geometry will have some attributes attached to it. For example, vertex position, normals, UVs, etc. Here I need vertex position, and position is vector 3, so I'll go float 3 position, and this position will be in object space or local space, so I'll go ls for local space, and then I will tag it with position semantic, which tells our CPU where to look for the vertex position in the actual memory space. Then I need to pass this data to my GPU, and I can do that by just defining an attributes parameter in my vertex shader. Then I'll need another structure. I'll call it varings, and here GPU need to catch that position, so I'll go float 3 position, and here I need to tell GPU where to draw my cube on the screen, so this position will be in clip space, so I'll go cs clip space, and then I'm going to tag it with sv position. Then in my vertex shader, I will define varying structure variable, so varings, let's call it output for now, and then I'm going to go output dot position clip space equals to a dot position ls. Now we have a problem here.
Okay, so the other guys, this makes sense for the other guys now. Okay, so if I come back into here and we put back the other guys, now that I know that those errors are not actually errors, we're probably better off. There we go. Look at that. Perfect. Okay. I will not go into detail on each of these elements as part of this tutorial, but just be aware that they exist and that I set all of this up for you in the boilerplate download. Also be aware that we will need to go back and add new properties to the Getting started, finally. We're all done setting up the scene and importing our boilerplate. Now we can have some fun with introductory concepts to lighting. Let's take a step back and imagine time and space before the Big Bang. Everything was dark, no stars, no moons, no planets, no atmosphere, no rocks, no nothing. Now imagine that you created a perfectly round, perfectly white sphere similar to the one that we have in our scene right now. What would you see? Well, nothing. Everything around you is black, no light now is hitting the sphere because there is no light in the universe, in this universe. The sphere is technically white, but without any light to illuminate it, it appears completely black. You can touch it, but you cannot see it. This is what happens without lighting. The lights, everything. Now imagine that we create a star or sun. Oh. All right, I'm gonna go lay down. Sorry. All right, I will catch you guys later. I am not feeling well, and I effectively just need to like, take a step back, and I'll probably veg. I'll probably just freaking do some studying. I'll catch you all later. All right, thanks. Bye.